Welcome, and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. We will conduct a question-and-answer session during today's conference. To request to ask a question, please press star 1. Today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objection, you may disconnect at this time. I will now turn today's meeting over to your host, Ms. Rosa Pace. Ma'am, you may begin.
Well, thank you very much, Erin. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rosa Pace. I'm Senior International Trade Specialist who will be your host today. On behalf of U.S. Department of Commerce Trade Information Center, thank you for joining us today for this program on Export Basic webinar on export documentation for new to export companies. This webinar is one of our series from the Basic Guide to Exporting program that is designed to help companies new to exporting or train staff new to supporting export activities. It is an 18-part series delivering information on some of the fundamentals of exporting to make sure that you will find the right markets, have the right plan, classify your products correctly, do appropriate due diligence needed, and get paid. So thank you for joining us today for this webinar on export documentation. And if you have not registered for others, we are encouraging you to do so. You will see on this welcome slide the link to the registration for the upcoming webinars. And I want to welcome a very large group of you today that dialed in from throughout the country, all the way from East and West Coast. I'd like to also make just a couple of brief housekeeping announcements before we get into the meat of the matter today. First, just to let you know that everyone will get a recording of this presentation within 2 or 3 days. We will also email you out not only this recording, but copy of the PowerPoint presentation of the slides that you will be able to print it off for yourself and your colleagues in case you need to refer to them in the future. The operator will come back on, and you'll at the end of the session, you'll have, I meant to say that at the end of the presentation, you'll have opportunity to ask questions. The operator will come back, and you will have a chance to announce yourself. And in order to that you have asked to ask questions, and our presenter will be able to help you with them. As part of our webinar series, we cover many topics that are essential for building your international business and, of course, getting your products flawlessly and effortlessly from the U.S. to the markets where they are intended. All these webinars, including today, as I say, are free, and we hope that you will find them useful in your day-to-day activities. You are the ones who are helping the national economy. You're helping preserve and create jobs in your communities. And you're the ones who are helping to fulfill President Obama's National Export Initiative, and we want to thank you for participation in this important effort. Today, I have a great pleasure to introduce you our presenter, Ms. Deborah Blaylock. Deborah works as a Regional Compliance Manager for U.S. and Europe with Laird Technologies. She is a licensed customs broker and is also a certified export officer with 20-plus years of experience in importation and export processes worldwide. She has great expertise in export documentation as well as export compliance issues. So, Deborah, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Raja. Welcome, everyone. We're glad that you're able to make it this afternoon to the basic export documentation training, and we'll look forward to your questions and answers at the end of the session. I would like to say to you that when putting together this presentation, Raja and I wanted to take a very simplistic approach to it, step by step. Hopefully this will be of some use to you. You may already know some of this, and what you don't know, we hope you'll come away with some knowledge. And if not, please feel free to, ask your questions at the end of the session. Today, basically what we're going to cover is the basic information you need to know before you start shipping. We're also going to do an overview of common export documents, overview of specialized documents, sources of export documentation, and things to remember, and then we will have our questions and answer session. Next slide, please. Okay, this is some basic information that you need to know before you get ready to start shipping. Obviously, you need to know your origin and destination class. You need to know origin and destination classification codes for the products that you're going to be shipping. And you can supply a destination country classification on your commercial invoice if your business makes the decision to do so. This decision to report the destination HTS on your commercial invoice can be driven by the applied Incoterms or the order or the shipment. Let me just make a couple statements on there. There are companies who show both their origin. Let's say we're shipping from the U.S. to China. And let's not even use China. Let's say U.S. to Europe. And we're going to go U.S. to Europe. It would be the origin HTS code would be on your commercial document, and then you would have the destination HTS code. The origin classification code obviously will be used at the time that you're filing your AES filings, et cetera, to get the product out of the U.S. So that is required information. And then if you determine that you will be the import of record into the destination country, you can have that HTS code for Europe on there so that it works very systematically, or you can just use the HTS code for your shipping country. Again, that is something that you and your businesses will make that decision on. I will tell you that my past employer, we did do the origin and destination, but that was most of the time what you found was we were always the exporter of record out of the U.S. because that was a business decision to control export reporting. And then we became the importer of record into the countries we shipped to where we had legal presence. And we wanted to control not only making sure that we had due diligence and were trade compliant in our processes in the importing country. We did supply the origin and destination HTS when we shipped to our, when it was a customer order. We had it on our documents. We left it out there. If our customer who became the import of record into a country where we may not be the import of record, they chose to use it, that would be at their discretion. Obviously, the harmonized tariff schedule is generally classifies the goods. It assigns your 10-digit tariff classification number to it here in the U.S., and it's based on such things as the name, the use, and or the material used in its construction. So just please be aware that when you get ready to export, that you are going to need to know what your HTS code is, and we'll talk about it a little bit more, but you also will be looking for a Schedule B number. If you need to get more information on classifications, we've provided the hts.us itc.gov URL for your reference. Next slide, please. Okay, you just heard me mention the Schedule B code is needed for AES filings. The Schedule B code is still like a classification code. In most cases, they're the same as your HTS codes, but there are some differences. So you have to make sure and go in and know you have to have your HTS code and your Schedule B. But again, the Schedule B could look and be exactly identical to your HTS code, but there could be some differences. The Schedule B numbers are used to classify exported products in the United States and are based on the International HS system. Again, you can find these out on the website that's provided at the bottom of this page. And HS numbers of the importing country and U.S. Schedule B numbers will be the same up to the first 6 digits. And again, it's up to the first 6 digits, but you can see some direct matches. Next slide, please. Okay, now when you get ready to export something else, another classification that you need to have and you need to be aware of is your export control classification number. We actually put a column right on our commercial invoice that says ECCN, and we made sure that in our database, in our classification databases, that we had the ECCNs assigned to every product in our database that we were either selling or ordering. And an ECCN is a specific alpha character code that identifies the level of export control for articles, technology, and software, collectively items, that are exported from the member states of the Warsaw Agreement, including the United States. We won't get into that. That's a whole other training class, but you'll see the Warsaw Agreement contains a list of countries who also participate in the export controls and regulations, and also look for certain types of export control classification numbers. The ECCN that applies to any specific item is determined by referring to a table that is issued for the United States by the Bureau of Industry and Security. ECCNs are controlled, just for people it's not really documented here, by the Commerce Department, and it will tell you where you can ship it to, what countries, who your end users are, but you have to make all those determinations prior to shipping. Many people ship lower level products or products that aren't controlled. What we would do is, just again for an example, if our products had no controls, we would just drop in EAR 99, which was just an indicator that the product had been reviewed and that it was EAR 99, and we didn't have any controls or any regulations we had to comply to for those line items. Next slide. Something else we needed to talk about too is the United States Principal Party of Interest. This ties back into your Incoterms, and within your Incoterms, what happens is that if we are not going to be the exporter of record, these companies that are on this call today in the U.S. are not the exporter of record, then and our customer comes to us and says, no, I'm going to send my broker in to pick up that product at your dock. I'll take care of exporting it out of the U.S. I'll take care of all the transportation costs, and everything is going to be fine, hunky-dory. Don't worry about it. Basically, that's called a routed shipment, and these folks are called these people are going to be a foreign principal party of interest. Now, if we are normally the company that's selling for export is called the U.S. principal party of interest. That would be us. If we are going to manage it ourselves, our companies here in the U.S. are going to manage this, then we are going to take total and complete responsibility for filing via AES and taking legal responsibility for the ECCN codes and the Schedule B codes, and taking any legal ratifications that may come from these filings. We will take legal responsibility for that, and U.S. Customs, Census, and all of these groups will hold us responsible for this information being correct. Now, there was someone calling in today on the call who had a particular interest in the routed transactions. And those routed transactions, just keep in mind again that if we have a routed transaction, let's just put it in the terms. Here we are, I'm a business in the U.S. My customer comes and gets the product, and my customer doesn't have a legal presence in the U.S. That means they don't have a tax identity number. They don't have anything, but what they've done is they've hired a broker. They said to this broker, I'm going to give you my power of attorney, and I want you to act as the foreign principal party of interest on my behalf. Well, what happens is they come to our dock and they get that shipment. What we have to do, though, as a business here in the U.S., we have to assure that this company actually really did file the AES, and that they did ship it out legally. Now, what is the downfall of this? The downfall is that broker doesn't work for me. They don't work for any of our companies. They work for this foreign company in another location. So what we haven't had was you heard me say that we had made a decision at my last company that we would not do routed transactions, because we did not want to have to go in and chase down the different documentation to prove that that everything definitely got filed properly. And something else that happens here, not as much as it used to, but we would be selling our product to a company with the idea that its ultimate destination may be, ABC country, this business, and then what happened, there was some transshipments going on, and it would actually get diverted somewhere else where we didn't have visibility. And we're going to talk about export reviews and knowing your end users, but there is routed transactions, happens every day, but you need to really think about if your company can manage it internally, if they can manage it internally, and go to that broker to get that documentation. Now, is there anybody here that has any questions on this before I move forward? Because sometimes this is the slide that Raja and I get a lot of questions on, and I want to make sure everybody feels comfortable with this before I move to the next slide.
I think, Deborah, probably at the end it would be easier if you don't mind, you know, because you have chock full of information.
Okay, that's fine. Well, everybody make a note if you want to talk about this, because this is usually one of the topics of questions. Okay, we'll go to the next slide, please. I've already pretty much spoke to this. It's the foreign principal party of interest. What is the risk? The risk is that a United States principal party of interest that allows the FPPI to designate the freight forwarder can be under some compliance risk, as the freight forwarder may perceive its alliance to be with the foreign principal party of interest, not with us. Additionally, the foreign principal party of interest generally directly or indirectly pays the freight forwarder for the movement of its freight. And that's fine that they're paying it, but there is some obligation they have back to us. Next slide. You heard me talk about the power of attorneys. Power of attorney is required for when the freight forwarder is acting on your company's behalf. We have power of attorneys, you know, when you make an importation into the U.S., you've given a power of attorney to a broker to act on your behalf. You've also, when they're filing your AES, you've given them that power of attorney will cover these export filings. Also, you have the power of attorneys when you're participating in like a free trade zone. And you heard me talk about the power of attorney being used whenever a foreign principal party of interest is asking someone, a broker or freight forwarder in the U.S. to represent them. And when that happens, a power of attorney must be in place. And please remember, any third party acting on your behalf must sign a power of attorney, and you should have a confidentiality agreement in place to ensure that your information is legally safeguarded from being shared with any other third parties.
But Deborah, if I may, I just noticed we got in Q&A a couple of questions on that subject. I just didn't want to interrupt the meeting in a sense that, you know, folks would dial in. I have to put different numbers. But those are written, perhaps, if you don't mind, I take you up on your offer and ask you a couple of questions on this subject.
That's great.
Yeah, first one was a participant is asking, can I, as the shipper, file AES for a routed shipment? Why or why not? Is this a good idea? You sort of started talking about that, but if you want to add anything more to that.
Well, you are not, let me address this. Not without a power of attorney, and I don't know that you would want, I will say to you this way, I would never make the recommendation that you act as the exporter of record and the AES filer on someone else's behalf that doesn't reside in the U.S., because here's what happens. You take on all that legal responsibility. So if an error happens or that product does not end up where it's supposed to be, the person that the government's going to come after is you and your company. So you want to be very careful how you put yourself in that position. Now, as a company, I wouldn't do that. I would recommend to them that if they have a broker of choice and they want to give a power of attorney to that broker, our brokers here in the United States are held to very high standards and are covered under the regulations about what they're supposed to legally do and report. So I think that would possibly be an area or a way I would direct them to go, was say, you know, we as a company can't act as your, you know, AES filer and take that legal responsibility, since we're not paying for the freight and don't have control over everything. But may I recommend to you that you use your freight forwarder and provide them your power of attorney. Now, what is this customer thinking? This customer is thinking, I don't want to pay this broker to be my power of attorney and to do this. So that's why they're asking you to do it, because the brokers will charge money for acting as a power of attorney and taking that legal responsibility for that company that's out of the country. But don't let your customer put that legal responsibility and risk on your company in case something goes wrong. Please know that that customer will not be held accountable for any errors or any transshipments. It's going to come back to you, because the government here in the U.S. is going to see you as the legal exporter of record.
And another quick one, in a routed transaction, is the U.S. principal party in interest responsible for ensuring the nominated forwarder has obtained power of attorney from the foreign principal part of interest? I guess you sort of addressed that already, but the specific second question, part of that question is, do we need to maintain a copy of the power of attorney?
You will not be given a copy of the power of attorney because it's a legal document and a legal contract between your customer and the broker. You can get a statement. You can, let me say that I said you will not get that. In most cases, people will not share that information or give a copy to us as the seller because we're not part of that legal contract. If you get one, that's wonderful and you should maintain it. If not, you should address that with that customer and ask them for some kind of statement, something on their letterhead that indicates that they, that they have a power of attorney in place with ABC Broker who's located in the U.S. who will be representing them. But get something in writing that does state that it has, that, they have given that power of attorney to them.
And if you could perhaps address very quickly, and we really need to move on, it's in a routed transaction, is it okay to sign a consent to screen form?
Okay, can you repeat that question again?
I'm sorry, yeah. It says, in a routed transaction, is it okay to sign a, quote, consent to screen, end quote, form? Not sure if some of the questions we may be able to answer offline or, if you need to.
Okay, and I will be honest with you, I've not heard of the consent to screen form, at least not in that terminology. To me, that means an export screening. Maybe what we could do is ask that person who's listening today to maybe just send an email to you and I directly, and then maybe we could correspond, and I could answer that one offline because I'm just not sure the consent to screen. I haven't dealt with, I don't think I've dealt with it under that terminology. I may have dealt with it under another, something else.
Okay.
All right? All right. So basic information you need to know before you're shipping is also, it's very important that you demonstrate to the buyer that you're open for business by attaining, you obtain your federal ID numbers, which is obviously your tax ID numbers. Also, your Dun & Bradstreet number. You have all of this information available, and this will come into effect when you're making your sales and then throughout the whole shipping, negotiation shipping process. What I'd like to do is just, I'm going to hit on this very lightly so we can kind of step up the presentation here a little bit. Incoterms. I hope everyone is aware that Incoterms 2010 changed as of January 1st to Incoterm, and there has been Incoterms that were removed from the book, and there has been Incoterms not added, but there's been a lot of really great specifications. One of the greatest things that happened was they did take away some of the Incoterms that we really didn't use or that were probably some real misunderstood ones. But what they did was go in and really clarify things in the new Incoterms 2010. The book is available. I recommend everybody have one. Have one, in your trade compliance team. Have one with your salespeople, and do some internal training on that. But the Incoterms definitely are used, are terms you want to use correctly, and you want to make sure they're implemented right in all of your sales orders, your purchase orders, because if you do it correctly, it can mean money to your bottom line, and it actually identifies for you who's paying for the transportation, who's responsible for loss and damage, who's responsible for the exporter record and costs associated with that, and who's responsible for being the importer record and costs related to that. And again, there is, at the bottom of that page, you'll see the URL. You can go on back and go to the next one. Basically, speak with your customer early in the negotiations and determine who is responsible for the following charges. And once you do that, then you can work into your Incoterms. Please, one other little thing, and then we're going to leave Incoterms, is remember that Incoterms are not just DDP. No longer can you use just DDP or any of the others without giving some kind of specification about it. What that means is it's going to be delivery duty paid to the port of import or to ABC Company's dock in destination country. So you've got to be very specific with that. I know that's very vague, but that's a whole other training session on its own also. Export reviews. Basically, here's what happens in export reviews. Is before your sales folks even go out to talk to people, if they've got a prospective customer, there should be some export reviews done, restricted parties, those types of things. If you want to know everything about the different export reviews and all, you can go out to the BIS website, and it has some really good directives for you there. But please note that we must know who we're selling to. We must know who we're selling to when we're prospecting the sale. When we're establishing the customer in our database, we must make sure before it hits the database that we've done an export review and that these people are not on the restricted parties list or on some of what we call the bad boy lists that are out there, because you do not want to bring them into your fold and start doing business with someone we're restricted from doing business with. So all exports must be screened prior to release 2 of the shipping department. Basically what happens is you can set it up in a couple different ways, but export reviews before the shipment happens, you're going to make sure that possibly, depending on how you set up your operation, that you can screen as you go through the whole order process, and as the order is pending in your operational system. Some people have 3 to 6 months. Some people have longer lead times, and in that time frame, that customer may have hit the bad boy list. So at the time of shipping, you're going to want to make sure and try to double check it again. Again, there's a couple different ways that you can work that. Any or all export license, you want to make sure that when you get that ECCN code, you're going to make some determinations. If you have a ECCN that is controlled, you have either do self-classification and yearly reporting to BIS or the Commerce Department, and or you go to BIS and you get a CCAS, a commodity classification, and that will give you some of the restrictions of who you can or cannot ship to and the restrictions and reporting elements around it. So when we get ready to ship, we have to build in not only that ECCN code, and I think you can see we're building to the product coming out the back door at this point, so that if we have some controls in place, we have checks and balances and possibly some other reporting that has to be done on either documentation and or yearly reporting based on what the license require. You must report on your commercial invoice or pro forma invoice all export indicators or references to said export license, and I've talked about that a little, EAR or ECN, etc. And again, that's another training class. Next slide. Company organizations that might be involved in your export review process is sales and marketing, order management, research development, your country controllers, your shipping departments and logistics teams, your IT groups within your organizations, and your trade compliance teams. Customs valuation, what we're going to just talk briefly about, this is some more information that has to go on your commercial invoices, is customs valuation, and there is a procedure to determine the customs value of imported goods. I won't get into all the transactional value is first and the most important method of valuation, and one that's mostly is one of the ones that most of us use. Always remember it's the price paid or payable without deductions and or additions. Government does not want you to give a credit within those values, so you want to be real careful with that. Please go to please go out to the CBP, the Customs Border and Protection website, and you'll be able to get a lot of information on valuation. And there's some really good literature out there by, I think it's Bosich and some of those that have some good valuation booklets that you can buy that helps explain it a little more when you're wanting to make sure that you're reporting your values correctly without any uplifts, deductions, or additions. And the valuation must conform to the commercial realities and not use arbitrary or fictitious values. That means don't guess. We can go to the next slide. Cases where customs authorities have reason to doubt the truth or accuracy of declared values. Customs may ask the importer to provide further explanation that the declared values represent the total amount actually paid or payable. If doubt still exists, Customs may decide that the value cannot be determined according to the transactional value method. So they'll go in and start basically looking at your valuation and what does it mean. It usually means an audit. Then note you declare your values also on your AES export filing, and then again when shipment is presented for import processing. So remember that value goes on your document when you get ready to ship. It needs to be accurately reported, correctly and legally reported by the regulations. That is going to be used at the time of importation at the destination country. We're also going to pull that same value off and use it in your AES export filing coming out of the U.S. And as this says, make sure your value is correct before releasing the shipment. I'm going to talk again very quickly about export documentation for pro forma invoices. And it's basically, I'm going to just give you a very high overview. Pro forma invoices is something my company and companies have stayed away from. Pro forma means that you may not have the values all right at that point, and you just don't have all your information together, but you're going to go ahead and ship it out. But it is a legal financial. In business, pro forma means the financial statements that are prepared in advance of a planned transaction. I will share with everybody on the phone, I have gone through a massive import audit, and one of the first things they pulled is they pulled every import where I had a pro forma invoice involved. And what they did then was making me go back in and making me go in and look at all my accounts payable and receivable information to make sure that the values that were declared at the time of import matched up to my payables and receivables for that transaction. So you'll want to give that some thought. Next slide, please. All right, and this is also basically the same thing. It's used to declare the value of the trade. It's not a true invoice because it's not used to record accounts receivable for the seller and accounts payable for the buyer. In most cases, it's not. In your situation, you'll have to take a look at it and see how that works. I'm not going to say to you never to use a pro forma invoice. I'm just sharing with you some of the nightmares that I went through, but it is a legitimate document, and if your company chooses to use it, then please make sure that your payables and receivables match perfectly to what those values are. Next. Okay, sales quotes. Okay, pro forma invoices could be used with the sales quotes or prepared in the form of a pro forma invoice, which is different from a commercial invoice. It's used to create a sale and is sent in advance of the commercial invoice. A lot of times that's the preliminary document that goes out. And it is basically the content of pro forma invoice is almost identical to the commercial invoice. If you look at the data items within the two documents, they look very closely the same. They just have either commercial invoice at the top or they have pro forma invoice at the top, and is usually considered a binding agreement, although the price might change in advance of the final sale. So we have to be, again, very careful. Next slide, please. What we did here is Raja pulled out some good copies of some documents that we're providing for you just as reference. And this is a copy of a pro forma invoice. You can see some of the data items. Please note that as we share with you these different examples in this presentation, is that you don't have to use the ones that we're providing here. Obviously, your express carriers do provide you certain invoices within their operating systems when you have a FedEx or a UPS or whoever it might be. But many companies go in and set up their own documents and have their own documents set up within their operating system and don't necessarily use this type of format. So please know that you're not stuck to using this format, but I will tell you that the data elements in the different documents are accurate and are data elements you should show in your own documents if you create your own. Basically talking about a commercial invoice. This is a document used when shipping to a foreign location provided by the shipper or exporter, which allows for customs declaration. A commercial invoice identifies the HTS codes for the products being imported, which are used in the customs clearance process for assessment of duties or taxes. Please understand that on your commercial invoice you may have multiple line items. Each line item needs to have its own HTS code, or if you're using a Schedule B code, that's what needs to show up per line item. A lot of people come down and say everything is one line item and try to put it in the body, which is fine if that's how you want to run it, but it makes it simpler and clearer for not only the customs regulatory groups here in the U.S. trying to help you get it out of the country, but also in the destination country. A commercial invoice is a bill for the goods from the seller to the buyer and is used to determine the true value of goods when assessing duties and taxes. Please keep in mind that when you're making an import into a destination country, let's say we're going to Europe or some of the other countries that have value-added taxes, whatever value and whatever information you provide on that commercial invoice will be what is used to pay your duties, to assess your assessment of duties to get into that country, but also that will be the same information used for your value-added taxes. Again, we've given you a commercial invoice just for your reference here. Export documentation on the commercial invoice. These are just some data items, and again, you can go out and you can look up what data items are legally required or need to be seen. I should say they're legally required, but they need to be seen there. And you can find those out on the website also. It's ship from information, company name and address, ship to company name and address. Obviously, your Incoterms. Again, I can't stress how important your Incoterms is. And then on commercial invoice, you must declare the ECCN and HTS code. And again, that could be ECCN and Schedule B. And that can be your origin HTS and your destination HTS, depending on your company's decision, how they'd like to manage that. Also, actual part numbers, quantities that are being shipped per line item, value of your products being shipped, value times quantity per line item, and then the extended value, the country of origin of each line item. And keep in mind that when you're declaring country of origin, just because you sourced it possibly in the U.S. does not mean that's where the country of origin is, and your product may have more than one country of origin, and that needs to be addressed also. Commercial descriptions, and not a scientific name, okay? I work with so many engineers where I'm at now, and they give me names that, I don't have the education to understand their terminology, so we've had to really work on getting our commercial descriptions together. And that means something that a layman can understand. If you're shipping a widget, say you're shipping a widget, and you can put specifications behind it, but tell the governments what you want. I also was dealing with an audit, not just in this country, but in another country, whereby the government regulatory groups were very upset with us because they couldn't understand what we were really importing or exporting because we didn't give them a good commercial description. Next, obviously, on your export documentation, you're going to want to see an AES ITN number. It must be recorded on the document when applicable. And so after you file for your AES and you go through all of that, it gives you an ITN number, and that needs to be stamped or written. Most of the time we see a stamp, but depending, again, how your business runs. But the ITN number is your approval number for exportation. If you have a letter of credit, it's involved to make sure that your commercial invoice, packing list, and applicable airway bills have all required information documented per the letter of credit requirements. That's the biggest reason people don't get paid or don't get paid timely. If you have a letter of credit, it usually has certain specifications and how many sets of documents have to be, moved with the shipment and then have to be sent to the bank or wherever. So please make sure that if you have letter of credits that you get, you really dig down deep and find out what the specifications are of the letter of credits. Optional is a purchase order number. It's optional, but I don't know many people who don't put a purchase order number on there, and that's because the person who's receiving the product needs to log it into their inventory, and they usually go by purchase order number and then start breaking down what they received. Export reporting where applicable, I can't even talk, and it means where any documents pertaining to export transactions, that's license applications and approvals, license exceptions, exemptions, and documents in support of bulk licenses and agreements, also export shipping documents. Next. Basically, commercial invoice, destination control statement. For some shipments, the appropriate destination control statement, called a DCS, from the ITAR, for ITAR for the defense articles on United States military, the USML, or from the EAR for items on the CCL, that's a commerce control list, is required on the commercial invoice. If you're doing anything with military, there's a whole different set of regulations that you have to go on, that you have to work with ITAR, and I'm sure everybody's aware of that. I know a lot of people work with the Commerce Department, which is EAR and a Commerce Control List, but please be aware that there are certain statements that have to go on your documents based on the regulations. And we've given you an example here for the ITAR docs, and even given you the regulation and the part in this section to refer back to. And please note that ITAR, anything military, is managed by the State Department. Next slide, please. The approval of the EAR, basically this is more statements. We actually have this statement on every single commercial invoice. We put that down at the very bottom. That just covers us for everything. So again, when you're getting ready to export out, please know that the Commerce Department is looking for us to do due diligence, to say we are not only in our communications and from our sales and our negotiations, but even at the time of shipping, we're still following through to make sure that we put this type of information on our bill of lading and our commercial invoices. Next, please. Export documentation. Bill of lading is a contract between the owner of the goods and the carrier. Also, it's used for vessels, and there are two types. There's a straight bill of lading, which is non-negotiable, and a negotiable shipper's order bill of lading. The latter can be bought, sold, or traded while the goods are in transit, and the customer needs an original as proof of ownership to take possession of the goods. Next. And I apologize to everybody for going so quickly, but I want to get before we can have some questions and answers. All right. It did not change, Raja. There it is. Okay. Also, export documentation. You have your airway bill. It's an air freight shipment. It requires airway bills, which can never be made negotiable in any negotiable form. And there's some examples. Airway bills are shipper-specific, like the UPS, FedEx, DHL, whoever you're using, those airway bills are assigned to them. We have an export packing list. You'll see different information that is on your export packing list. You'll see the seller, buyer, shipper, invoice number, date of shipment, mode of transportation, and carrier. It also itemizes quantity descriptions, types of package, box, crate, drum, or carton. As you can see, this is the packing list is more directed at the actual transportation requirements that the different carriers will require. And both the commercial stationaries and freight forwarders can carry packing list forms. A packing list may serve as a conforming document. It's not a substitute for commercial invoice. But most of the time, your carriers are going to ask you for the commercial invoice and a packing list. And the packing list will also contain any kind of special directives or information that you may want to give your carrier. If they're shipping it and doing a drop shipment for you or something, you may make that special note and notification there so your carriers know what to do with your freight. Next slide, please. Some other export documents, some other documents that are often required on an export shipment because they are documents prepared in the U.S. that are needed for import clearance into destination countries. Basically what happens is some of your destination countries may require a certificate of origin, and they may require that to be a certified certificate of origin. I'm sure some of you may have gone and got certifications from your Chamber of Commerce, and they may ask you for that. and I think we've all dealt with that one. And the next slide, please. This is just a rough copy of a certificate of origin, but again, you can go online and get one of these. A lot of times your freight forwarders, carriers will provide them to you if you don't have one. If you're going to get one too, you sometimes, Raj, I believe Chamber of Commerce will supply them for you too, right?
That's correct.
Okay. All right, next slide. And some other documents are free trade agreements, special certificates that may be required to qualify for tariff benefits under the free trade agreements. Please understand that as we move from one country to another country, we may have certain agreements with them, but those agreements may require a different type of document or certification, or even where we are actually certifying that we qualify for their programs. So you'll want to pay close attention for that. Also, NAFTA. I think many of us probably understand NAFTA is Canada, U.S., and Mexico, and the NAFTA Certificate of Origins are something else that our customers will request for us to provide with the shipment. We do this constantly at my current position, and our customers need those because we do a lot in and out of Mexico. Okay. And again, there's a copy of the North American Free Trade Agreement certificate. Please understand that when you do this, you don't have to do one. If you're shipping the same product over and over, what I like to make sure everyone realizes that if you're in your description section here, if your product is the same product and you're shipping it over and over, you can put up in section 4 here on the right-hand side, put various. That means there's various importers. That way you don't have to cut one for every single customer. And you can use various and make sure that you have your blanket and do it for a year, and then just keep a good running tally of who you've issued them to, and be prepared to issue them again if that customer or customers are still with you and buying product from you. But again, don't fill out more of these than you have to. Other documents may be for inspections. Some countries are going to require that before the product leaves the U.S., and I'm just using the U.S. as an example, that they want one of their inspectors to come in and certify that the product is what we say it is and that it's functioning correctly. You see this a lot with machinery, and I used to have this. I used to have to do this from my other company. But anyway, so your inspection certifications. So just know that those may be required also. And again, I've had some people say to me, well, how do I know this? This is information that your salespeople are negotiating at the time of a contract with a customer. So you need to make sure that you're in communication with your contract team, your sales team, whoever manages that, so that you know this and know this ahead of time before the piece of equipment gets sitting on the back dock and you're ready to ship it, and then you're held up because you got to wait 2 weeks for the inspector to come in, and then you may miss your delivery date, which could have, could be a fallout for your company cost-wise because of payment and et cetera, et cetera. Next, please. The certificate of free sale. Certificates of free sales also, you're going to know this falls into a whole lot of stuff for food and drugs, medical devices, and if you fall in that area, you've probably already seen this. And then also where you have a certificate of analyst is required for seeds, grains, and health foods, dietary supplements, again, where the products are tested to make sure they're analyzed and they meet the certain requirements. Dangerous goods certificates, I think we're all probably, the majority of us, aware of those. When we get ready to ship certain products, obviously some things are dangerous goods. They become hazmat. IATA is the big one. If you fly any freight, you know that if you have products that fall into these categories, and this again is a whole other training where people get DG certified, and you have to understand what the products are, but just like a compressed tank. Long time ago, there was a plane that went down in the Everglades in Florida, and it turned out the reason it did is it had air compressed, some kind of tanks with gas or something in it, but it was pressurized. That was not declared at the time of shipping, and they blew up, and the plane went down, and people were killed. And ever since that, this has really stepped up. It was always there, but the regulations are very tight, very strenuous. Please know your product and know if you fall in these areas. If you don't have a DG certified staff member there, you should be able to work with your freight forwarders or shipping groups, whatever companies you're working with. They should be able to help you with this. Next. You have the ATA carnets, other documents. If you have temporary shipments that are going in and going to come back out, these are documents that have to be marked. A carnet has what they call foils. It's layers of documents. And as the product moves through the countries, and you'll see it a lot when you're going to market and you have a new product and your salespeople are moving it through, it has to be stamped and has to be returned. Know that those documents, you better stay on top of that too, because if everybody doesn't stamp it and it doesn't get reported properly back, it can cause you some problems. You've got Certificate of Registration, which is U.S. Customs Form 4455, and it's used for shipments going out of the U.S. temporarily in order to avoid duties upon returns. Some of you guys know it as the 9801 programs and the different programs that are out there from U.S. Customs. Next, please. Shipper's Export Declaration. I'm going to go really quick now. That's what we used to have. It used to be an SED. I don't know how many of those I've filled out manually, but now it's your Automated Export System, AES. Please know that this is a requirement, and it became in effect as of July 2nd, 2008. You no longer could do the SEDs. Most of your AES, you go online and you can file it yourself. If you don't feel comfortable filing it yourself, you can pay your freight forwarders and or your express shippers to do it for you. But it is a legal requirement, and you must file it. And this is where values are declared. This is where quantities are declared. This is all that information on your commercial invoice. In essence, you're going to move a lot of that information over into this AES system, including your ECCN codes and any licensing information. Next. Pretty much have addressed that. Please look at the third bullet where you can go in. There's a website there that gives walks you through the screens and gives you an overview. They have it's pretty easy to follow. It's good tutorials. So basically, you can look at this slide after we finish, but I've given you some of the options for pre-departure and post-departure that you can refer to. Next. These are the requirements. I'm going to go through those again. Generally, AES filing is required for the following. Any export containing one or more commodities classified according to the Schedule B number, and that's in Field 22 in the AES system, that is valued at more than $2,500. Remember, that's $2,501 and up. Okay? Any export that contains a licensed export, including to Canada. Any export to a country listed in the 740 Supplement 1 country group, and you can find it in those regulations. Any export subject to ITAR, a commercial invoice looks very much like an invoice that any seller, okay, we'll go to the next one. Okay, the seller's home currency along with the monetary payment. Let's see, AES filing. Okay, I got to get back in groove here. Seller's home currency. You're also going to report the seller's home currency along with the monetary payment required. So you're going to use that. Please remember again, this information is used for duties and VATs. Then the international invoices indicate to the freight forwarder what the sales terms are, generally Incoterms. Okay, and we'll just slide on that. Okay, so the commercial invoice AES exemptions, these are some of the exemptions that you can use, and this is shipments originating in the U.S., including Puerto Rico when country code is U.S., is destined to Canada. You can see the exceptions there. Also exemption for shipments valued at U.S. dollar $2,500 or less of one HS category. Again, this is a whole nother training session, but this should give you some leadway. Next. Okay, here is a screenshot of the AES web page. Please go to this. You can register, you can log in, you can take the tutorials, and again, it's real simple and easy to follow. And I think if you have someone in your shipping department that understands it, you can save yourself money if you don't want to have to pay that extra money out to your carriers or express carriers. Next. Supplying correct information. Supply the correct information is essential for a smoothly handled order. We need to properly manage our export controls leaving the U.S., properly furnish accurate documents needed for import clearance at the destination, properly route the shipment to destination, ensure that the commercial invoice and other documents are done correctly so that the company is paid in full and on time. Next, and these are some places that you can find some of the forms, either at this one site or from the freight forwarders, customs brokers, but these are not the only place you have to get it. You can find a lot of these documents in many different locations by just going into Google and finding it. Right here, as Ruja is showing you, is where you can find it. There's DHL, a lot of common export documents, NAFTA certs, and so you'll be able to reference all of that. Okay? And obviously, you can go to our host site, which is export.gov, and Raja and her team will be more than glad to help you. They have a lot of this information on this site, and then they have a lot of really good people there who can help you find what you need. And just remember your documents. They must travel with your shipment, may also be transmitted electronically based on requirements of your customer or your company, and copies may have to be shipped ahead of time to a sponsoring bank if a letter of credit is involved. Questions? Okay.
Deborah, first of all, thank you so very much for your very informative presentation, chock full of information. I know you touch upon some of the topics briefly, not because you didn't know about it. It's such a wealth of information. It's just the topic is so vast. And in fact, we will be having future webinars, including with Deborah being a speaker on Incoterms. We'll have some other ones, and we'll like to strongly encourage all of you to dial in or go to our archive webpage on export.gov when you can tap into this information. And we did receive, Deborah, a number of questions here. I'd like to maybe read them over, and then, operator, if it's okay with you, then we would like to open it up for other questions. Okay?
Okay.
Here's one question. If you sell your product to a dealer in Europe and drop ship to their customer directly, are you able to hide the value on a commercial invoice to your dealer's customer?
That has been a challenge for all companies because you have to declare a value. The only thing I can recommend to you to do, and we had the same situation, we had a manufacturing facility in China, and we were trying to do drop shipments out of there. What we had to do was, let me just give you a recommendation, is you need to act as the importer of record if you have your customer act as an importer of record. If you don't have a legal presence and your Incoterms drives it this way, you're going to do a drop shipment from the U.S. to your distributor in Europe. Basically what happens is the only control points that you have is the broker, the importer at the time of importation into Europe. You need to be able to ship your documents. You need to have to clear the price paid or payable. But what happens is then the documents have to be pulled off of your shipment. That means you do not want them to see. You can leave a packing list with no values on it, so that there's destination and shipping and delivery information, but you have to, basically what we had to do was we had to pay our transportation group to go in and pull the commercial invoice off the shipment. And also, you know, we had to pull back all those documents so that the only thing that person who was receiving the product in Europe would see would be a packing list. Then what happens is your distributor in the U.S. would have to bill them accordingly and match up, you know, to the shipping information. But this is an ongoing problem. You need to talk with some of your freight forwarders are very aware of the drop shipment issues and not showing those values to the end customer. So I'm not really giving you a solution, but I'm giving you some ideas about what it was. And I will tell you, we did pay extra. It cost extra for us to have that paperwork pulled off of the shipment to secure it. And not every time did that work, because sometimes if the carrier forgets to pull it, then what happens is that customer, that end customer, gets visibility to that value, what the price paid or payable is between you and the distributor. So it's a very hard task to do.
And by the way, a comment, one of the participants mentioned that the consent to screen, it's a TSA requirement.
Okay.
That was for the other question.
Oh, okay.
And Deborah, on Incoterms, are Incoterms for sale of goods only, or can they be used for items that they are on loan?
Well, let me say it this way. Even though you're loaning them, somebody's got to pay for the transportation. Somebody's still got to be the exporter of record. Somebody's still got to be the importer of record, okay? So you still need to clarify that, and there still would need to be some type of Incoterm that at least called that out. You may be loaning that product or equipment to someone, but someone still has to take responsibility. Now, I don't know who's paying, what the agreement is, who's paying for the transportation, and who's taking legal responsibility, because what happens if you loan a piece of equipment and it gets lost or damaged? If in the contract with that customer, you're saying, look, I'm going to loan it to you and I'm going to pay everything, then obviously, basically you'll figure out the Incoterm. But what you have to do too is if you don't have a legal presence in that destination country, you need to make sure the Incoterm clearly states or calls out that that customer will be the importer of record, or at least pay for the importation, act as the importer of record, and if there's any cost or anything. But most of the time they've probably got a way to do a temporary import in their country, but you need to let them drive that if you don't have a legal presence in that country. And the Incoterms will do that. Okay?
Okay, and another question. What if an export company has an export representative or district manager located in Dominican Republic, for instance, while located in the U.S.? Does this is this an issue if products are exported to district manager to that country? Does it matter if that person works for our company?
Okay, so you have a district manager, and I'm not sure I totally understand, but I'm going to try to repeat what I think I heard. There is a district manager located in another country, and this person may be on contract to us or may not be an employee. Maybe what I need to do is
located in the U.S.
Pardon me?
Yeah, maybe that question is a little long. I mean, maybe we just ask a participant to email to us and we respond.
Ask them to send it to me, and if I need to get on the phone, we'll go through it.
Okay. Regarding NAFTA, I can determine NAFTA code, but how do I find out what cost of the NAFTA tariff would be? Okay, maybe I could answer this question. Yes. What happens is, as far as qualifying products for NAFTA, the NAFTA certification and NAFTA qualification allows company to take advantage of the duty-free benefit under NAFTA. Again, products will be taxable but not dutiable. What we do have on our Exportgov website access information to duties and tariffs, and you could compare the so-called standard and most favored nation rate to the NAFTA rate, and we certainly can call us on 1-800-USA-TRADE, and we'd be very, very happy to look it up for you. Okay. Now, next one, if our customer export to South Africa from the U.S. but does not have the business registered here in the U.S., can they use freight forwarder as the shipper on the export bill of lading? Customer export to South Africa from U.S. but does not have business registered in the U.S. Can they use freight forwarder as the shipper on the bill of lading?
If I understand that right, basically on the commercial invoice, they're wanting to show the broker here in the U.S. as the ship from name. I'm thinking that's what I'm hearing, Raja. Basically, I use the calculation or the term as follow the money. If that person is not the person paying for the money, they should not be shown as the person shown as the ship from. from this broker, because unless the money, you have to follow the money, and that if you go through an audit, that's what's going to happen. I would not lean to doing that as far as a policy within my company. At this stage of the game, what I would recommend is I don't understand, you know, the payables and receivables are not going to be between your company and that broker. They're going to be between you and this country, this company in Africa. And, you know, I haven't ever seen that done, and I wouldn't recommend it. And I will leave it open for comment when we open up the phones if anybody else has experienced that and would like to share it, but we never allowed that to happen.
Okay, and I would like, the operator, I'd like to open up for any additional comments that folks might have. And for those of you, I know we are past the hour, but if you're interested in some of the questions that your colleagues might have, please hang on the line, or if you are tied up with everything else as far as your work is concerned, you do have information on our screen, both for Deborah and myself, so feel free to either call us or email, and we'll be very happy to follow up on your questions.
If you would like to ask a question over the phone, please press *1 and record your name when prompted. To withdraw the request is *2. Once again, to ask a question or make a comment, please press *1 and record your name. One moment for our first question. Our first question comes from Lou. Your line is open for your question.
Sorry. Hi. I wanted to find out regarding the value. How do you determine valuation on, like, if you were to do a rental or a loaner to a customer that you charge them, and if you have a list of products and you don't charge them per item, but like a fee?
Okay. So you rent a customer a product and then you export it out of the U.S.?
Yes. Like if you were to export out of the U.S. and you say, you know, if you rent it for 90 days, it will cost you, you know, $5,000 or, you know, for instance.
Okay. In essence, if that's the price paid or payable, we would have to look at all of the parameters around your contracts, but it'd be that price paid or payable, and then I would recommend that you export it with verbiage that this is, you know, being exported, you know, as a loaner to be returned back to the U.S. You flag it before it goes out so that when it returns back, you don't have to pay duties on it. I know that wasn't your question, but I want to make sure that you flag it on its way out so that it can be flagged and captured on when it comes back in, so that you don't have to pay duties and taxes on it if you're truly going to bring it back in. But, you know, not knowing all the parameters, my first response, and then, you know, we could talk about it later, it would be that, you know, it's the price paid or payable, if that's what they're paying just for the rental, but we need to really look at it a little bit closer to see what your agreements are.
Yeah, like if that's the agreement, if they were to, you know, rent it for 90 days, this is how much they're going to be paying for. And, I mean, what do we actually report on our invoice? Right.
And are you offering any other services along with that? Do you have people go in, or you just say you can rent it for 30 days for $10,000?
Yes.
Okay. Well, what you have to do is be very, very specific that that's what it is. Okay. Just right off the top of my head, I would say it'd be the price paid or payable. I'd like to go back into the valuation and look at it to make sure that I'm not misleading you on that, because I need to read the regs on it one more time. But I believe it'd be the price pay or payable with the specification that this is, you know, this is a rental unit to be returned back to the U.S.
Okay.
Thank you, Lou.
All right, thank you.
Our next question comes from Joseph Nada. Your line is open for your question. Joseph, please check the mute function on your phone. Our next question comes from Lindsay. Your line is open for your question.
Hi, yes. I have a drop shipment from Phoenix, Arizona to Miami, and well, the end destination is Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
Our company's value is $2,500, for example. The customer gives us an invoice, and it's for they're upping the price to $30,000. My question is, what do I file for the AES? What amount?
Okay, so basically, in essence, have you got a domestic sale? Are you doing a domestic sale? Is your customer in the U.S.?
No, our customer is in Brazil.
It's definitely in Brazil. Okay. Only reason I ask is sometimes things get bought in the U.S. and then they ask us to drop ship them out of the U.S., but the transaction happens in the U.S.?
Yes.
And so we double check that. Okay, so basically you're selling it for $2,500, but they're increasing the value to $30,000 so that's what they see when it goes into Brazil?
Correct.
Wow, that's a nice uplift.
I'm just giving you as an example.
Yes. Well, the bottom line here is that's what's going to show on your commercial invoice. But I'm thinking, I want to think out loud with you here, Lindsay, because what happens is your price paid or payable is only $2,500. I want to make sure that you don't have a problem either with taxes.
Okay.
It's not just a matter of AES. It may be a tax issue because if you're showing on your books $2,500, but your commercial invoices are generating for $30,000. Now, is that commercial invoice that you're generating for $30,000? Is that actually what the payables and receivables is going to be?
No.
It's going to be the $2,500, right?
Correct.
Okay. Two things. The first thing I would do if I was you, I would make sure and talk about it to my, your corporate controller,
okay,
your tax people, and explain to them what the customers ask you to do, just to make sure you don't have any tax problems.
Okay.
Because your documentation's not going to match in case of an audit, so you want to talk about that. As far as AES is concerned, I don't want to give, again, I've never had this situation come up where it's that way. Basically, my first response is what's on your paperwork is what you got to file, but that's not really true information. I would actually, if I was you, talk to the AES group.
Okay, so give them a call.
Yeah, because I don't want to mislead you because legally I want to make sure that you do it correctly, and I haven't dealt with that. But again, talk to your tax people, let them know what's going on, because whatever is on your documentation is what's supposed to go into AES.
Because basically, the company I work for, we have a set price for certain things, and the customers like to increase that value for the end customer so they see that it's different. So then I was just curious, like I said, which value would I declare for AES? Would it be my company's value? Or would it be the value that the customer wants?
Right. And see, what's going to happen is if somebody pulls the documentation and you've only done $2,500 and it's reading $30,000, they're going to flag you for an error.
Got it.
And
well, what happens if the difference isn't that much? Let's say it's $2,000 difference.
Okay. Well, you might want to do that, but I would, and Roger, you may want to comment on it, but I would definitely address this with, the AES team. And Raja, is there someone else that we could direct her to?
That's exactly what I was hoping to chip in with. Census Bureau has its regulatory affairs office. We found them wonderful, easily accessible, and very helpful in terms of interpreting all the rules and regs related to AES filing. And the number there is 1-800-549-0595, and press number 3 to speak on regulatory issues, number 1 when you have technical questions related to the EEI filing on your Exportgov website. Again, 1-800-549-0595.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Lindsay.
And if I may, Deborah, here's another question that we got via computer. Drop shipment to a third party. Can the commercial invoice, paper copy on goods, go with the shipment have a different value purchase price by the third party than AES filing? I guess that's the same question was from another person.
Right. I will tell you what will happen. I would recommend against it because what's going to happen is you're going to be presenting one, and again, if there's some carriers or freight forwarders on the phone who have even more experience with this than my physical experience in doing daily transactions this way, is that if you go to make a presentation or customs document with one commercial invoice and it does not match on what's marked on the box, and you have an inspection, you're going to have an issue. They're going to stop it, and then you're going to have something an intensive exam like we have in the U.S., and then you're going to have to your shipment's going to get stopped, and there's going to have to be a lot of explanation as to why this value is different on the documents that are attached to the box versus what's on, what you're presenting to customs. And again, I'd love to hear from any of the freight forwarders that might be on the phone as to how they may have dealt with it. I know the freight forwarder and how we did it, but, I'm sure there's all different angles to work it out, but it is a difficult challenge.
And I guess we have time only for a couple more questions. We went, past the hour quite a bit.
Okay. All right. More questions?
Our next question in queue did not record their name, so if you did queue up to ask a question, your line is open for your question at this time. Please check the mute function on your phone.
All right. Guess we'll go to the next one.
There are no further questions in queue at this time.
And last one here on the computer, a participant is asking, we are establishing an office in Peru. What guidelines must be followed? Our office will be the importer of record.
Okay. All right. If they're going to be the importer of record, the first thing is work with Raja and her team because they know what all the specifications are and the requirements, and they have people on the ground there in Peru that can help you get all the legal requirements of what you need to do to establish your company there. Obviously, it's tax IDs and getting that, but I don't have all those specifications. But, Raja, I'm going to defer to you to help them on that because I know you have people on the ground there.
In terms of actually establishing a market presence in a foreign country, we, the commercial service that our office is part of, have presence in some 80 countries. And one of the wonderful publications that our offices are putting together for exporters is called Country Commercial Guide. Country Commercial Guides are prepared for doing business with many countries all over the world, even in the countries that we do not have a presence. We also have our partnership offices doing it. So, for instance, for Peru, if you go to Export.gov website, you could register yourself for free, go to Market Research Library, and the Country Commercial Guide for doing business with Peru can be accessed. And this Country Commercial Guide has a section on market entry strategies, different ways of entering particular countries. So let's say whether you want to have a direct sales, distributorship office, whether you want to have just different modes of entry are described. And there's also contact information. And you can also, of course, call us, like Deb said. And we had also a couple of questions about can we have a copy of the presentation? Yes, as I mentioned earlier, we will be sharing with all the participants a copy of PowerPoint presentation as well as the recorded session, so you'll be able to listen in again to Deborah's answers. And I think with that, we'd like to complete this webinar presentation. Deborah, once again, thank you very much for the presentation and for your willingness to take the questions, and also for your willingness to follow up on any additional questions that participants might have. And as I say, myself and my colleagues in Trade Information Center are ready to help you with basic information on exporting, such as trying to figure out duties and taxes, export documentation, qualifying your products for free trade agreements, different standard-related questions. We either will have answers for you here, or we are connected with our vast network of friends through our domestic offices in pretty much all states here, as well as in many other countries. So if we don't have an answer, we definitely should be able to find one for you reasonably quickly. Again, thank you for dialing in, and we encourage all of you to consider joining us in for our future webinars, and thank you all.
And Raja, I'll hold on so we can talk.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for your participation in today's conference. You may disconnect at this time.
Thank you.